Okay, so welcome back again. This is going to be part 3 of my new player's guide. This one I wanted to focus on strategic or tactical deployment. As you can see, we're back on the same map that we were on for part 2. Just makes it a little bit easier since I don't have to build another army and all those things. And the army that I had built has, a little bit of variety in terms of unit types and things along those lines. So before I had mentioned that roads and things like that give you speed bonuses. There's a couple different ways that you can deploy on roads depending on your particular playstyle and how nice you want it to look. Some people do this type of thing where they deploy them sideways on the road, because whenever you shift select or drag select like this, you can do this movement here, and then whenever you're marching down the road, say you're trying to go this way or something, you just go like this and give them the order, and then more or less the unit will follow this road until they get to here, and then they'll stop and form up again. The other way that you can do it is a little bit more tedious depending on the map and the width of the road. So this road's pretty narrow, so doing this is probably not ideal, but it looks nicer, and that's to literally place every single unit in column going down the road. The downside of this is it's really hard to micro, and it takes a lot longer to set up, but it does look nicer and your units aren't technically stacking or blobbing or anything. And it's a little more cinematic, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing. Some roads, it's a lot easier to move like this, and there is a benefit that whenever they get to the next location, they don't have to reform or anything along those lines. In theory, you can also give shift select orders. So like if I wanted to micro this whole road and make sure that they stay on the road the whole time, I would give like an order here, and then I'd hold shift, and then I would do another click order here, and then hold shift, and then another click order, and so on and so forth. Sometimes that's actually slower following this bendy road here than it would be to just do a shift order here, and then a shift order all the way over here. So you can see how this road kind of goes like this. It's actually faster to probably just march straight across it and then keep going through this forest than it is to try to follow the road exactly. Likewise, when giving shift orders, the other downside is if your units are in that sort of like blobby shape where like they're stacked on top of each other like this, when they stop and you finish the order, it will take a few seconds. Here, I'll just go and play it. Like, if you move them like this, they'll take a second to reform, right? So you'll see what I mean here as we go. So they'll have to come to this formation before they'll execute their next movement order, and it has to stop. When you hear the drums like that, that means that the unit's stopped and it's ready for its next order, and then it will execute the next one. So that can actually slow you down quite a bit whenever you're marching on roads like this. So if you give constant, small, incremental orders, it generally actually negates the whole purpose of putting them on the road to begin with, which is what you want, is the speed bonus, right? So always keep that kind of in mind. Now in terms of like actual field deployments, remember how I said like I like to have my armies organized in the EUI as quote-unquote brigades. So one trick that you can do is with the custom UI, you can move units around. I like to just move some units up a little bit so I can differentiate where they are in my roster and sometimes what their purpose is. So I just move my light infantry up. I want to be able to recognize them at a glance that this is my light infantry. This here, I moved one on each end up. This is like my shift select brigade. I can try and find it no matter how I organize my army and how crazy things get on the battlefield. I can quickly look at my UI and just look down here and see that, okay, this is a brigade. This is like if I highlight this unit, I can see that it's probably going to be still grouped with the rest of the brigade, and so on and so forth. And then, if you have like a melee unit, you can raise them up as well to keep paired together. If you know that you have like a bad unit somewhere in here, like these two from the last video are just kind of filler lines, I want to make sure that they're in reserve somewhere, and then so on and so forth. So build it however you feel most comfortable, but the general idea is like you can kind of give yourself visual cues, like the like neuron activation type of thing of easy to recognize patterns on your UI to make your micro a little bit easier. So the other thing that you want to do is, you know, obviously your cav will be up front. You can split your cav into different areas. In general, you don't want this formation whenever your cav's actually fighting. I try to do that just in the beginning stages, but when you're actually moving cav, you want them to have a sort of like V shape or an echelon shape. And the purpose of that is because if one of your cav units gets charged, you have another cav that can go in on the flank, and then another cav that can go on the flank, and so on and so forth. So your cav is always supporting each other. If they're flat like this in a block, most people will just shift select all their cav and like right click a unit when they're new to the game. That makes it quite difficult to actually get the maximum effect out, because your unit will actually run this way and then this one will run into it, and you'll recharge yourself and do more damage to your own unit than you will to the enemy. So maximizing your frontage while also making sure that your units are spread out is really helpful. And I'll go into more detail about cav deployment at some point and some cav play and things along those lines. As you can see, my army's slowly building itself up and getting together. This is a kind of a semi-standard deployment that I would probably take in real life if I was playing, you know, against any enemy player. The biggest weakness that a lot of people have is they'll just take all of their units and just drag them out in one long line. And the problem with that is there's no space for your other assets of your army. So like, say if you have a one long line army, that's a solid frontage, right? You can't run cav through this and make an effective charge. You can't counterattack with cav to make a successful charge. You're now blocking your own artillery. So like these guns won't be able to shoot anywhere if there's infantry in front of them, right? So you have to put them on the flank where they'll be exposed. When they're exposed like this, you have the possibility that light cav is going to come run around and snipe it or just come straight forward. If you have infantry instead supporting it, right, like in big blocks around it, and deep reserves, you don't actually have to babysit your artillery as much as people think. If your artillery is, you know, a little bit behind your lines like this, they have to run through your infantry to get to your guns. And a lot of times you can shoot their cav down before it even gets into the middle. And then you have the double effect of, you know, your infantry's up here. If the enemy pushes you really, really hard this direction, they're going to keep pushing you back closer and closer and closer to your artillery. So you'll eventually be supported throughout the entire engagement as you're pulling away. Or if you're attacking, it's the exact same thing. That's why I like 8-pounders and medium range guns like this. It gives you the ability to shoot from afar throughout the entire engagement of like what a normal engagement would be. So here I've created a nice alleyway, you can see, for my artillery to shoot through. I'd probably even move this over a little bit more to get a better firing angle and really maximize the ability to pick what I want to shoot at, especially since I'm on very flat terrain. And then, as you can see, I have my skirmishers up front. These will be like, you know, you can put them on a flank or shoot through them with artillery or whatever you need to do to try and tank space, essentially. Like, if 2 line infantry are shooting at 1 skirmisher, then you have 2 extra line infantry somewhere else that can do something, you know? So just make sure it's close enough, your infantry's close enough to support it, but not too close that you shoot it in the back. That's generally like a pretty good plan. And as you can see here, my general is also quite safe in this type of formation. Like, I technically don't need to have my cav babysitting either my gen or my guns, as long as I'm well scouted. And that's again where scouting comes into play. When you're in main engagement and you can see where the enemy's infantry is and remember it on the mini-map and where the cav is going, you don't need to babysit everything that you have and wait for, like, if someone was to try and snipe these guns right now, it's not going to make it. I have plenty of time to react. He has to make it through these skirmishers, this line infantry, and then my reserve line infantry, and I still have cav ready. So that would be pretty much a suicide of his cav, and any good player will know that they're going to be basically losing their cav for that. The other benefit of having these sort of alleyway approaches is that when you need to, your cav can make it through these spaces with little effort. You don't have to completely change your formation of your army and your deployment in order to make, you know, say you see the enemies retreating in front of your infantry and you want to charge cav in. I just moved 2 brigades out of the way and I have a very clean charging lane to go through. And, you know, if the likewise like reverse is true, say you see the enemy cav is coming to attack you frontally, you now have a good counter-charging direction to go through. Maybe you catch his cav first, and that gives your infantry time to shoot it in the flank or something along those lines. So having these sort of bigger open formations is generally, in my opinion, better for your strategic flexibility, and then also making sure that you maintain your reserves. Reserves is probably the most important aspect of the game that a lot of new players struggle with. Learning to pull units out once they get tired. So you see these are fresh. Every morale debuff, and you can see also it has encouraged superior local force. That means that it's surrounded by friendly units. And it's actually pretty far for how far the buff actually needs to be to get the supported on the flanks or supported in the rear bonuses. They don't actually have to be touching like this. They can be like this far apart and still get the local bonus of supported by flanks or supported in the rear. This might be a little bit too far. I don't know the exact range, but you could just move it up a little bit to keep your reserves intact or whatever else you need to do. But yeah, that's an important morale bonus stacking. I think it's like +2 for flanks and +1 for the rear or something along those lines. I don't know the exact numbers because honestly it's not something that I care about. I just care that it's there and it exists. You don't have to know like every single modifier or every single detail, because ultimately like your actual formation benefits from being this way than it does from being in a single long line. The other benefit of this is when you have reserves like this and units in close support, when people like charge cavalry in, you would have the ability to have units behind to support. If they're not like clicking through your lines and things, they'll hit this one, and then you still have units behind, you see in reserve, to be able to shoot the cav as it's coming through. So you can kind of move your units into a position where you can counter cav without having any squares. So you know this has no squares at all. But if you were to charge a cav into this, with all this different spacing and everything, not all of these units are going to be caught. It'll probably get caught on this unit, and then maybe this unit, and then these two and this unit will be able to shoot the cavalry and try to rout it before this unit gets broken. And you'd still have spacing to be able to probably sneak your dragoon through here without crossing yourself, if you're really careful. So you can see here, and it's a little bit too chunky of a dragoon, but you'd be able to at least like not fully cross your own line to make that attack work, or counterattack. This one would be a no-go, but it exists. So yeah, like the reserve idea is really, really important for how you build your armies and keeping yourself in positions where you can constantly get numerical advantages, or at least be trading higher with whatever it is that you have. So like here I have my pinning brigade. I know that these units are meant for pinning and they're meant for dying. So if I can have these 3 units hold up, you know, half of the enemy army while it's supported by artillery, then this other half of my army, my attacking power, is free to make its maneuver room. So I can have these guys marching on the flank while these guys are pinning with skirmishers, and I still have enough reserves to keep them in the game, you know? And then the artillery is also buying me more space. So supporting your infantry and supporting your advances and things like that with artillery is obviously always good. A A lot of people think that artillery is useless. I'm definitely not one of those people. It also depends on how good you are at clicking with the artillery and targeting. For here, this is probably honestly a terrible position for guns. It's too flat. You're not going to be able to get great shooting angles, but you know, in a pinch, suboptimal artillery range, as long as the tubes are clear in front and you're not shooting uphill, will be fine. So like, the converse would be like here. If I had the guns here, this is worthless because you're not going to actually hit anything. It's really important to actually zoom in on the ground that you're going to be shooting from to see if whatever it is will actually clear. The same would be said for these skirmishers. Like, if there's a line infantry behind here, it probably won't actually hit. Like, if I was to position a line here, you're not going to actually hit my infantry, even though it looks like you're in range. Knowing those sorts of things and being able to tell your positioning is really, really important in terms of the tactical gameplay and how you position your armies. Let's see, what else would there be? So you see, you can use your light infantry to make your fast flanks, and same with L4s. Try to like keep your L2s and your L3s central, because they don't have the tactical speed, as we talked about previously, to make like those fast, rapid redeployments. So like in theory, like if I was to suddenly see another army over here, you know, I would need to be able to like redeploy quickly on a central position. And if you have a slow army, you're not going to be able to do that quickly. But L6s on the flanks can reposition in a way that they can still support yourself and support the other elements and get there in time. But, you know, an L2 isn't going to be able to make it from this side of the field all the way over here in time to support that flank. So if you can, like, build up your army and keep your reserves mobile and not overcommit, then you'll be okay in terms of how your infantry is being utilized in the battle itself. I'm trying to think if there's any other major, like, little bits that I can give you. Obviously, like, if you have your melee troops, if you can, try to keep them out of a line fight, because while some of these units, like this one, shoot quite well, this one is actually not a melee troop at all, I guess. It's 12 melee attack. But, you know, like a grenadier, like this shoots okay, right? 1847. It's not great. It's not exceptional. It's slightly below average, I would say. But, you know, it has 20 melee, but it only has 85 men. So if you waste this unit that you paid for that 20 melee attack in a line fight, and it loses 15, 20 models, now it's 65 men. It doesn't have the cushion to take a charge or make a charge and take point-blank volleys. So if it's already down models and you have to charge it in, then you're charging in a 75% strength unit, and now it takes one volley and it's 50% strength, and it has to carry out the charge with that. A 50% strength unit rarely makes a charge work. So if you can keep it in reserve and keep it out of harm's way until it's needed, but close enough in your reserve line that it won't get, it's not far enough away that it's useless, but it's prepared and ready to exploit whatever gaps or attacks that you find, then you can feasibly have it, like, I don't know how to explain it better, but the positioning is really important. I try to keep it like in a central, like my melee troops centrally, unless I'm trying to push a flank, and then I'll maybe attach them with the flank battalions, where like my light infantry will force back an enemy, and then I can hit the angle with my grenadiers or something along those lines, or, you know, cavalry. Like I said, I'll probably use actual gameplay videos for further demonstration of like how to make attacks and when cavalry should be used. It's really hard. I know to visualize some of these things from no enemy and just me moving things around on the map. But that should give you some idea, like, of how your deployment should be. I personally like to have less than, you know, if this is my front line, you can see that probably like 60-70% of my army is essentially in reserve. If you're peaking above, I don't know, say like 65-ish% of your army is fully engaged, and your reserves are starting to become, you know, maybe 2 battalions or 3 battalions, then you're probably in trouble if you're on the defensive. If you're on the offensive, then obviously you're throwing in your reserves and you're trying to make an attack work, and you're doing what you can to commit the full power of your army at somebody. But if you're in a defensive position and your full army is committed, then you probably needed to retreat a long time ago, and you're about to be overwhelmed. It's not impossible to hold. It's just, it means that numerically your army is probably at its absolute limit, and if the enemy is able to mass up against you and you have to keep funneling in more resources to either protect a flank or protect your center or what have you, and they still have more resources coming, then you're definitely about to get rolled over. A lot of things strategically in this game are still relative to like real applicable military tactics, like concentration of force and things along those lines. So, you know, like I showed in the 1809 game previously, that sort of ability to combine multiple cores against one player and get a 2v1 or a 1.5v1, whatever it is, just getting a slight leg up on your opponent in terms of total number of manpower available in a localized front can lead to you stomping out that core. And in reverse, if you're in the defensive and you know that you're going to be in the defensive and you can see that you're tying up multiple players, try to build up like a wide front, as wide of a frontage as you can with the limited amount of resources that you have. So this is arguably a lot wider than what you could probably do by just dragging out a single army, you know? Like, I can have these battalions way over here, this skirmisher here. I'm using guns to create more spaces. My cavalry is still alive. The biggest thing with cavalry is that people bring too much of it and then lose a lot of it, and then they don't have the rest of their army. Cavalry that's alive is better than cavalry that's dead. I guess that can be said about most things, but generally speaking, cavalry is the easiest units to lose, and they generally also cost the most. So keeping your cavalry alive to fight another day is more important than just sniping or bullying units sometimes. I'm not saying be passive with your cavalry completely, but keep it alive. Keep it close to your infantry. Don't send it on like suicide flank marches, especially when you're new. The closer it is to your army, the better it can protect you and make a you know, counterattack against the enemy. So you can see how wide my flank is here. This is a fairly large deployment for what is an 8-point army. And I have lots of depth still. When you're looking at this and you're coming to attack it, I have lots of pieces to either move in to support, pull back to support. If you were to attack here, you know, I have this in reserve. I can counterattack with my cavalry. You're pushing me into my artillery, and so on and so forth. I hope this like sort of high-level overview of tactical deployment is helpful. I see probably like even veteran players that are not that great at using reserves or like tactical deployment, and to be fair, this does require a lot of micro, but you know, little tricks like how you organize your army in the roster down here and moving unit cards around a little bit. This is something new that I just started doing, was moving unit cards. All of these little pieces help, and hopefully it helps you. So thank you so much for watching.